With House of the Dragon coming out, I am left to reminisce about the winter in which A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms came out, and all the ways that it impressed me, especially with its show-only scenes. I'm admittedly pretty critical of the A Song of Ice and Fire adaptations because, well, we've really seen showrunners get it wrong. But in a lot of ways, I think Ira Parker really gets it right. The scene I want to focus on today is the trio of sex workers and their scene with Dunk. You might hear me calling them camp followers or brothel workers throughout the video, but what I mean is sex workers. The three women I'm talking about are Beanie, Rowan, and Leah the Lovely. Fun fact, they never actually name Beanie or Leah the Lovely by name, and they only name Rowan in the finale. And the even more interesting thing is that when you looked on IMDb for their names pre the finale, Rowan was called Red. And the interesting thing is that Rowan's actress is named Rowan, so I don't know if that was a coincidence or they did that on purpose. And I don't think anyone really cares except for me. And it has no bearing on the YouTube video. Beanie, Rowan, and Leah the Lovely are in service of Manfred Dondarrion for most of the show. And I really love the added focus that Ira Parker gives to these women that are not even in the original story. Rowan has a line to Dunk in the first episode that has stuck with me this entire time. It's one where she draws the line between her profession and his knighthood. It must put its body at hazard for the pleasure of strangers. It's just, fuck, it's so good. And ever since I heard it, I have not been able to get it out of my head. And the larger implications that it serves, especially in Dunk's expanding story. So, spoiler alert for Dunk's story, especially The Sworn Sword, which is going to be season 2. So there's a long-running theme in A Song of Ice and Fire that who you pledge your body to is whose side you are on, for better or for worse. The story of Dunk and Egg is set as the first Blackfire Rebellion is coming to an end, and the still glowing embers of rebellion serves as a set piece for this kind of odd pair. In A Sworn Sword, Dunk pledges himself to Osgray and joins his cause against Rohan Weber, only to learn that things are not as simple as he thought they were, and he's pretty much chosen the wrong side. And he hitched himself to a losing horse. And beyond that, he doesn't even really fucking like the guy. Osgray was a Blackfire supporter, meaning that he would have seen Egg and his family kicked out of power and maybe even killed. He goes out of his way to say some pretty weird things about women, the Dornish, and Daeron's lack of abs, which has led to some pretty great memes, but still. This support is a direct threat to Egg, and stands against what Dunk believes in. After meeting Rohan and learning the full story, Dunk again not only disagrees with Osgray, but doesn't really like him after this meeting. Yet Dunk believes in knighthood, and he believes in honor. So despite Dunk not agreeing with him, he still fights for him, because he pledged himself to him. And he almost fucking dies for this guy, because Dunk swore to serve him. Dunk's struggle with knighthood is not uncommon in A Song of Ice and Fire. It's a common thread shared between Barristan, Jaime, Brienne, and Sandor. And yes, I know Sandor and Brienne are not technically knights, but neither is Dunk, so just stick with me. Side note, when do you think Dunk gets knighted? Do you think it's when he becomes one of the Kingsguard? I think that would be interesting. But these four characters in the modern time of A Song of Ice and Fire serve as a perfect gradient of knighthood, in my opinion. Barristan believed so strongly in knighthood, and sticking by his oath that he lost himself along the way, standing idly by as Aerys, Robert, and Joffrey did as they pleased. When he is stripped of his position at the end of A Game of Thrones, he goes off to Essos. And Barristan finds his purpose again in knighthood through Daenerys. And he's going to spend the rest of the books kind of trying to redeem himself for standing idly by in his passivity. Jaime, on the other hand, is quickly disillusioned with knighthood, especially when he sees what it means to be a Kingsguard. We read about the scene where he is shocked hearing the abuse that happens to Rhaella by Aerys, but he's forced to stand idly by because his job is to protect the king, not to protect the queen against the king. Jaime wears the title, but he abandons his vows pretty much as quickly as he gets them. He must relearn knighthood through Brienne, and find a cause worth fighting for beyond redemption and his future. Brienne was a member of Renly's Rainbow Guard, but was never formally knighted. She's never been allowed the same privileges as Jaime, Barristan, Sandor, or even Dunk by her being a woman. Brienne, in my opinion, is the truest knight that the series has to offer. And I think we're going to see these virtues being tested through further interactions with Jaime and Lady Stoneheart to come. Brienne's chapters also show us many knights who pervert this title. I think the story of Hyle Hunt and the other knights of Renly's camp really show us a tale of knighthood perverted. Catelyn even dubs them the Knights of Summer, which I find to be a very interesting title with a lot of, nuance to dig into, but I think we'll save that for another video. And then we have Sandor Clegane, the Hound. Sandor is pointedly not a knight, and he does not want to be a knight because his brother is one and his brother is a monster. He has no respect for the title of knight and carries no grandeur of what knighthood is. Yet he does do some incredibly knightly things while also doing some incredibly not knightly things. He's a hard guy to pin down. These 5 characters, including Dunk, are all very different. But their stories revolve around the people they do or do not choose to give their oaths and therefore their bodies to. And this is not too dissimilar from our sex worker characters in the main series. The 2 characters I want to focus on today are Shae and Pia. Pia is not a sex worker by tradition or in the traditional sense, but during the original Lannister invasion of Harrenhal, she does exchange her body seemingly like for protection or favor with the Lannister knights. So for the purposes of the video, I would like to include her in the larger conversation, especially because of her and Shae's proximity to the War of the Five Kings. And also kind of just as a blanket statement, it doesn't really seem like any woman in the story has ever really chosen to do sex work. Rather, they've been forced into it or groomed into it as a means of survival, which kind of makes everything more tragic. Some examples of this being Sarah from Fire and Blood, Alayaya, or the Sunset Girl. Pia is the first example we see of being punished for the side you pledge your body to. After the Lannister forces are ousted from Harrenhal, Roose punishes any women who slept with the opposing force. Air quotes, because I have a lot of doubts of how consensual this really could have been, and their punishment is to be put into sexual slavery. Pia in no way affects the course of the war, but she is punished more cruelly than a knight of the opposing side would be. They literally have high-ranking soldiers in nice quarters. But through these actions, Pia is seen as taking one side or another, and it's really only through the grace of Jaime Lannister when the Lannisters retake Harrenhal that she's not punished further. And yet I find this in strong contrast to Jaime's time in Harrenhal. And despite fighting for the Lannisters, Jaime is treated nice by Roose's men. And yes, that's because Roose is working with Tywin, but even then, we see when the Lannisters are taken over Harrenhal, then Wyman Manderly's sons are treated pretty well. They get to walk around the castle somewhat. Arya has made some remarks of seeing them, and they stay in nice quarters. And again, this is literally the opposing force. Jaime admittedly gets kind of treated like shit at River Run, but he also keeps trying to escape. His cousins are treated really nicely until, the Karstarks go off the edge. But still, they are treated nicely as hostages. So why doesn't Pia get this same treatment? Shae is another really heartbreaking example of this comparison. Shae is a camp follower, and during a Game of Thrones, she is claimed by Tyrion. She plays the role of girlfriend for Tyrion. She fulfills his fantasies, she listens to his worries, and she performs the duty she is paid to do. She is doing a job, and Tyrion himself knows this, but allows the delusion of it being real to keep him from letting her go. The relationship between Shae and Tyrion is extremely transactional, and there are multiple times that Tyrion pushes the boundaries of that relationship, through sleeping with Shae when she's asleep, or even hitting her when she dares to push against one of his decisions. Tyrion feels that he owns Shae, as a nobleman feels that he might own his own wife, and he even fantasizes about one day marrying her. So when Shae shatters this illusion, it breaks him, because not only does she shatter it, but she has another job and plays that role just as well. Shae is bought by Cersei and Tywin, and while we don't know the specifics of this interaction, we have to imagine that Shae had no real power in this situation. I mean, Tywin is the hand of the king and the richest man in all of Westeros, and Cersei is the Dowager Queen, as well as the Queen Regent at this time. So you best believe she's gonna do a super duper fucking great job at whatever they ask her to do. Yet Tyrion sees this as betrayal and kills Shae for being with Tywin, the opposing side. There are other examples of sex workers being blamed and hurt for things that have really nothing to do with them. Alayaya is a great example of this. Alayaya is a sex worker that is groomed into sex work by her mother, the owner of the brothel, and she serves as Tyrion's cover throughout A Clash of Kings to go and see Shae. She's wrongly assumed by Cersei to be Tyrion's girlfriend sex worker that he always goes to see, and therefore is used to hurt Tyrion. She is beaten and brought before Tyrion bloody and crying as kind of like this punishment by proxy for Tyrion, to keep Tyrion in line by Cersei after she feels threatened by Tyrion. But why Alayaya? Why does she have to be this proxy? Why couldn't it be someone like Pod, who is Tyrion's squire, or Bronn, who is the sellsword that got Tyrion out of many of his messes and is kind of like his man on the inside? Why is Alayaya, a woman who is just doing her job, the one to face this brutality? You could really make the argument that Bronn is the one that is bolstering Tyrion and enabling more of his behaviors. Tywin forces his father's mistress, another sex worker, to do the walk of shame through Casterly Rock because she dared pledge her body to Tytos and accept gifts. God forbid! The sex workers who slept with Robert Baratheon are punished and have their children killed by Cersei because they are threats to Cersei's illegitimate children. All of these women are put in the same danger, if not worse danger, than knights in war. Game of Thrones show-only characters like Raz only exist to be exploited, sexualized while Littlefinger waxes about Catelyn for some reason, and then brutally killed. Raz's fate is to be killed by Joffrey after Tyrion sends her to him to blow off steam, and then we see her dead. Because we totally needed another example of how brutal and cruel Joffrey was. That wasn't already fucking clear. Another show-only character is Sylvie from House of the Dragon, who I talked about last video. Sylvie is a sex worker who is forced to sexually abuse Aemon when he is only 13 years old. Some people in the fandom refer to her as Aemon's abuser, given their age difference. But I would push back on this because when Prince Aegon Targaryen pays a common woman to do something, I don't think she really has much choice in that matter. Aegon is Aemon's abuser. He holds power over him, and definitely over Sylvie, and he holds the power to force this abuse by proxy. When Joffrey orders the Kingsguard to beat Sansa, do we call them her abusers, or do we call Joffrey her abusers? Do we recognize the power imbalance in this situation? If a knight with title and influence can't say no to a king, how the hell would a common woman be able to say no to a prince? Now, one could say that yes, they are at fault, and they could give up their titles as Knights of the Kingsguard. But could Sylvie really give up her only profession in this world, her only source of money, the only small bit of power that she has? And yes, I could relent and say that Sylvie, as the proprietor, as the owner of this brothel, in some ways does perpetuate abuse, through continuing this cycle of sexual slavery. But also we see through Mysaria that the minute that is taken away, the minute that Myzaria's brothel is burnt down, she's brought back to no status. It's only through Rhaenyra's, of her guidance and company that she holds any power, and she's not just sent to the bottom of the gutters. Because at the end of the day, the women of Westeros can't just walk away from the established institution of sexual slavery. This rot of sexual slavery even sinks into Westerosi marriages. Cersei describes in detail in A Feast for Crows the abuse she faces from Robert and even Jaime. Robert sexually and physically abuses Cersei, treating her no differently than a sex worker would be treated. Honestly, you could even make the argument that she's treated worse than the sex workers that Robert goes to. I mean, look at the reverence that Bara has for Robert, the love that she has for Robert. Cersei gets none of that. And Jaime treats Cersei better than Robert, yeah, but also feels like this entitlement to her. Their relationship is mutually toxic. I'm not going to say that it's not, but it's interesting to take a moment to view the toxicity through Jaime's side. Jaime treats Cersei as a wife, thus he feels the same entitlement to her and her body. And in turn, Cersei uses this to manipulate Jaime. One of my mutuals on Twitter pointed out a really interesting parallel, that Cersei doesn't want to have sex in the Sept because it's where Joffrey is, and I think she still does have some weird religious stuff going on, but Jaime kind of pushes it forward until Cersei relents. But when Cersei wants to have sex in the White Sword Tower, Jaime says no, and he pushes her away and he rebukes her because this is a place that is sacred for him. I think that shows a clear imbalance. And now obviously there's like other things going on in the scene and more things have happened and blah, blah, blah. But I just think it's an interesting thing to look at. And it's really hard to talk about Cersei and talk about the abuse that she faces because yes, she is evil in a lot of ways and she's really morally flawed. But because of this, people think that she deserves this abuse. I mean, open up any comment section about Cersei or Robert Baratheon and you see people laughing about how he hits her and how she deserves it. Yeah, it's really bad. And this is not to downplay the sexual abuse that Cersei then does to Lancel and kind of the horrifying ramifications that it has on Lancel's mental health. Obviously, that's really awful. But Cersei, in a way, is punished by the church for sleeping with Lancel, but no punishment will ever find Robert or Jaime for what they've done to Cersei unless it was done by her own hand. Daenerys is sold to Khal Drogo at the beginning of A Game of Thrones and spends most of the book being a bridal slave. Her body is seen as a bargaining tool for her older brother, and despite what a lot of people in the fandom like to say, she doesn't have really any agency in this marriage. Daenerys again has to give up her sexual agency and marry Hizdahr in A Dance with Dragons to kind of broker this temporary peace. Sansa, through her marriage to Tyrion, is sexually assaulted, and she is spared the worst fate that Daenerys and Cersei get, but only because Tyrion wants to like curb his darker desires. The Sunset Girl does not receive such graces, I would like to point out. Unless we forget to speak about poor Jane Poole. Nobility, although from a lower house, does not protect her from being sent to a brothel to work, when she is no longer under the protection of House Stark. Jane is punished for being a Poole, a vassal house of House Stark. She is then used as a pawn. She is sold off to the Boltons as fake Arya Stark, where she is forced to endure the absolute epitome of horrors of a Westerosi marriage. She is forced to live her life as a bridal slave, not unlike Daenerys. Jane is at the whims of Ramsay's cruelty, and she's even warned by Theon to not reveal her true nature when they run away to Stannis' army, lest she only be seen as a whore. She has less protection than a knight of her same ranking would be granted, through actions that she had no agency or choice in. Throughout the story, we are shown that even high-born noble ladies are not safe from the threat of sexual violence when they no longer have the protection of a man. The idea of sending Alicent and Helena to a brothel to live out their days as brothel queens is floated by Rhaenyra's cohort. Now, whether this idea actually was floated or not is hard to say, given the nature of Fire and Blood's kind of propagandized writing and like unreliable narrators, but nonetheless, the idea is really fucking horrifying. This sort of cruelty is only ever directed towards women. Aemon or Gwaine Hightower would never be sold into sexual slavery. Another prime example of this cruel and tragic fate is Elia Martell, whose only crime was being married to a Targaryen prince and being seen as in the way by Tywin Lannister. Noble women are only safe when they have the protection of their male counterparts. But once that is stripped away, they are no safer than any of the small folk women from the cruelty and depravity of Westeros. We see this clearly through Arya's chapters as well, as she faces near constant threats of assault while she masquerades as a common girl throughout A Clash of Kings and A Storm of Swords. Arya's lack of rank means that she is constantly abused, and threats of sexual violence are thrown at her nearly every chapter. In the Wars of Westeros, we receive the inner workings of many knights, how they feel, how they think, and who they give their hearts to. But we can't say the same for women like Pia or Shay. Their voices aren't heard, and they'll never receive the justice they deserve. Shay and Elia are dead. Jane and Pia, while they may heal, will never get true retribution for what happened to them. Knighthood and sex work inhabit the story and serve as a framework for so many characters. And yet knighthood will always receive a shining light, while sex workers and the abused fall into the background or the footnotes of tragedy. A knight can be redeemed, but an abused woman can only be put out of her misery or suffer in silence. So what can be done? Is the status quo unchangeable? A Song of Ice and Fire, despite its dark moments, is a story of hope. Many of our main POV characters are of a new generation, the shining hope, the dream of spring that come when the winds of winter blow. And many of them are young girls with agency, strength, and love in their hearts. One of Daenerys' driving goals in the story, and where we leave her in A Dance with Dragons, is to avenge Irohe, a girl who was sexually abused and then killed when Khal Drogo's Khalasar fell apart at the hands of Khal Jocko. When we pick up Daenerys' story, we will see her enact this revenge and continue her abolitionist movement throughout Essos and into Westeros. Arya, a champion of women and the small folk, will obviously not let this treatment of Jane masquerade as her at the hands of House Bolton slide. I wouldn't even be surprised if she got to meet up with some of Jon's free folk and start to take on their views of gender. Arya, in my opinion, is destined for leadership, and I think it's one that will shake up the gendered norms of Westeros. Sansa will end the cycle of violence with Lysa, Littlefinger, and herself. Sansa is a foil to her Aunt Lysa and Cersei, who both turned into abusers from their marriages and their lots in life. Sansa herself is going to become the lady that she's always wanted to see in this world, and she will have her true knight, Brienne. Brienne herself was confirmed by George R.R. Martin in a panel during 2025's New York Comic Con that she will be knighted in the future. I think this will be a historic moment that will reshape the future of knighthood, because change is coming and a new dawn will rise. And hopefully it's a kinder one to those who are most vulnerable. But this current narrative is not unlike our own, and I'd love to end this video highlighting some charities and different organizations that support those vulnerable workers in this world that is not forgiving to them yet loves to exploit them. Look in the description below for links to support or donate to these causes. And if you want to hear more analysis about A Song of Ice and Fire's books and their show adaptations and maybe even other media in the future, please consider subscribing to this channel. Throw this video a like, leave a comment about what you want to see next, all the good stuff. But until then, see you later.